Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Friday everyone. At his press conference on Wednesday, after his hours-long meeting with General Secretary Xi Jinping in San Francisco, a reporter asked President Biden whether he would still refer to Xi as a dictator. Biden's response, quote, "Well, look, he's a dictator in the sense that he is a guy who runs a country it's a communist country that is based on a form of government totally different than ours," end quote. While Beijing will not be happy with this comment, and many headlines are leading with it, the meeting between the two leaders and the trip generally appears to have seen some mixed progress, albeit modest progress, in stabilizing US-China relations. The PRC side is talking about the so-called San Francisco vision, which Beijing defines as having 5 pillars. 1. Jointly establish correct recognition. 2. Effectively manage differences. 3. Advance mutually beneficial cooperation. 4. Shoulder major country responsibilities. And 5. Promote people-to-people exchanges. Though Beijing doesn't like to state it publicly, competition is also a factor that governs the relationship, and the US and the PRC were able to agree that both would include the phrase responsibly manage competitive aspects of the relationship in their respective readouts. Of course, the most dangerous flashpoint in the relationship surrounds Taiwan. A White House official speaking to media after the meeting expressed that, quote, "She was trying to indicate that China is not preparing for a massive invasion of Taiwan," end quote, but added, quote, "President Xi underscored that this was the biggest, most potentially dangerous issue in US-China relations, laid out clearly that, their preference was for a peaceful reunification, but then moved immediately to conditions that the potential use of force could be utilized," end quote. There were a series of outcomes from the meeting, including China-US government talks on AI, to establish a working group on counter-narcotics cooperation, to resume high-level military-to-military communication, to significantly increase scheduled passenger flights from early next year, and to expand educational, student, youth, cultural, sports, and business exchanges. Fentanyl was also discussed. Quote, "It sounds like the most important outcome of yesterday's meeting, beyond the fact that the two leaders are talking again, is an agreement to restart coordination around cracking down on things fentanyl-related. Of course, there is reason to be skeptical of real action from the PRC side, given the history, but I think there may be reason for optimism that there will be some more meaningful actions to help stem the flow of fentanyl, precursor chemicals, and pill presses," end quote. Today's video is going to be a deep dive into this Biden-Xi summit, and up next we look at the business side of things. If you enjoy the episode and get some value from it, don't forget to hit the like button. After the meeting between the leaders on Wednesday evening at the San Francisco Hyatt Hotel, Xi Jinping attended a special dinner with some of America's leading business elite, including Elon Musk of Tesla, Tim Cook of Apple, Blackstone CEO Steven Schwarzman, Albert Bourla of Pfizer, and of course Ray Dalio of Bridgewater. She told the audience of about 300 people, quote, "China is both a super large economy and a super large market. Modernization for 1.4 billion Chinese is a huge opportunity that China provides to the world. The world needs China and the US to work together for a better future," end quote. The audience gave Xi a standing ovation. However, perhaps both sides were engaging in some degree of theater. US publication The Wall Street Journal cited a senior American business executive who attended the dinner as expressing, quote, "He offered no hints of concessions to businesses or even interest in more investment in the Chinese economy. The speech was propaganda at its finest," end quote. Another reportedly told the outlet, quote, "How could he not say anything about trade and investment, given the audience?" End quote. This has led some commentators to ask, with China's economy in such a poor state, was this dinner, with so many leading industrial and financial titans in attendance, a wasted opportunity? Myron Brilliant, a former head of international relations for the US Chamber of Commerce, speaking to UK-based The Financial Times, said while Chinese officials were reverting to the playbook of courting the business community for investment and to help manage ties with Washington, quote, times have changed, end quote, adding, quote, bottom line is that American business leaders don't want to be caught in a game of chess between China and the US governments. CEOs are risk-averse, and the environment between China and the US has increased the risk of doing business in China. End quote. In an interview, Michael Hart, the president of the American Chamber of Commerce in China, expressed, quote, I don't think that anybody thinks that one dinner or one visit or one conference is going to reverse all the hostility that has built up between the US and China. But a friendlier stance towards the United States will hopefully mean a slightly more friendly operating environment toward US business in China. End quote. US-based The New York Times reports that Xi's team had prepared 3 versions of his speech to deliver to the business leaders. Quote, after Wednesday's events with Biden went well, Mr. Xi picked the friendliest one. End quote. The following day, Thursday, Biden spoke at the CEO session of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in San Francisco, saying, quote, a stable relationship between the world's 2 largest economies is not only good for the 2 economies, but for the world. End quote. There were a lot of pretty words from both leaders on the business front over these 2 days, but markets were not particularly impressed. Chinese stocks slid following the Biden-Xi meetings, quote, as traders saw only modest progress in the strained ties and as fresh data renewed concern over the world's 2nd largest economy, end quote, in the words of US-based Bloomberg. The Hang Seng China Enterprises Index closed down 1.4% in trading on Thursday, after jumping 4% in the previous session, partly as investors looked to the summit for progress. On the mainland, the benchmark CSI 300 index snapped a 2-day advance, dropping nearly 1%. Quote, the China investment landscape is likely to remain complex in the near term, referring to Xi Jinping as a dictator, contributing to today's decline in the Chinese stock market. End quote. We also remember from yesterday's video, Thursday data showed home prices fell the most in 8 years in October, in a sign that the industry's slump is worsening. Okay, next up, and for part 3 of today's video, we move to some commentaries on the summit. As we will see, despite all the happy faces, neither side is ignorant of the true competitive nature of the relationship. On the US side, quote, Xi is seeking a short-term tactical pause in US-China competition, hoping to buy time so that he can address China's economic problems. Amidst any stabilization in US-China relations, though, it is important to keep in mind that Xi's conviction that the United States represents the primary threat to the Chinese Communist Party remains unchanged. As Xi assessed in March, Western countries led by the United States have implemented all-round containment, encirclement, and suppression of China. Xi likely still believes that the United States and the West more generally are in decline, while China is on the ascent. In his now famous formulation, the East is rising and the West is declining. So long as these views remain fixed, the bilateral relationship will be marked by increasingly severe competition with periodic tactical pauses. Making this judgment about the likely trajectory of US-China relations, though, is not to say that a meeting between Biden and Xi was ill-advised. To the contrary, it should be seen as a positive development. Given China's political system and the degree to which Xi has consolidated power, it is critical for the US president to have direct, lengthy interactions with him. This provides an opportunity to get a better feel for how Xi sees the world and China's place in it, directly convey US concerns, and underscore commitment to US alliances and partnerships. The meeting also sends an important signal to these allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific, principally that the United States is attempting to responsibly manage its relationship with China and is not seeking a conflict. In this instance, Biden also secured important deliverables on fentanyl, artificial intelligence, and military-to-military talks. The real litmus test for the durability of this easing of tensions, though, could come as soon as January 2024, when Taiwanese voters elect their next president. End quote. Now for the Chinese side. How has state media been discussing the summit? The consensus with analysts is that Beijing's media language seeks to show Xi to a domestic audience as Biden's equal and highlights his desire to stabilize ties as China deals with its economic problems. It also sends a signal to the bureaucracy and businesses in China that they can now engage with Americans again. Chinese academics have been more frank. Quote, "The real test is on the security front, and both countries are much closer to a real crisis, like one in the South China Sea, than many people may think. The US cannot hope it can pick up the pieces and mend ties, and the US must not mistake China's goodwill for being feeble or weak. Neither can the US hope that by creating a seemingly good atmosphere for talks in San Francisco and offering some hospitality, can it expect Beijing to back down on issues that matter to its core interests." End quote. Chan Jiu, Chair Professor of Finance at the University of Hong Kong, speaking to Hong Kong-based The South China Morning Post, observed bluntly, quote, "The meeting shows that it is almost impossible for any effort to reverse the trend of hostility between the two countries." End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a good Friday, and I will see you all tomorrow.